It's been a while since I've done one of these like rant type videos where I kind of just, give my thoughts and opinions on some of the different talking points that people have come to like expect from the channel. And as the weather has been changing here in Los Angeles, and it's November, but historically it's always been super hot, this isn't necessarily the climate for certain jackets. And I was looking at some of the pieces that I own, and it got me thinking like, there's a few items that I do regret buying from the brand, and I kind of wanted to highlight that. And I feel like sometimes what we do as consumers is almost like attach ourselves to a certain lifestyle and kind of stay in that like one lane mentality where we sometimes can lose our identity or some of like, the things that we care about because we think it like deviates from the subject matter of whatever it is, whatever brand you want to associate with. And in looking at my closet, I was thinking there are a few items that I regret buying. So the first item in my collection or wardrobe from Visvim that I regret buying is the Virgil boot. So I purchased the boot in a very great price, about $600 USD. And I believe that the year that I picked up was 2023 or 2024. I believe MSRP price on that pair was around like $1,300 or $1,400, somewhere in that like ballpark. And because it was on sale, the only size that they had was a US size 12. And while I know that the next thing I'm going to say seems like such a basic thing to consider, but sometimes we often overlook it in order to either buy a deal or to get a product that we otherwise think is sold out everywhere else. And sometimes we'll like sacrifice a little bit, whether it's on the comfort or on the sizing, in order to fit into a certain product or in order to obtain a certain product. And for those of you that aren't aware, I'm typically a US 11 in most Visvim releases, with the exception of like the very narrow items. For example, like an item like the 2 boot that runs relatively narrow, I tend to size up to a 12. So when I first saw the boot on sale for 600 USD or whatever, which is still a crazy amount of money, like I don't want to misconstrue that, but the discount was significant enough for me to consider like, you know what, maybe I can consider buying a US 12 and, either double socking it or adding an extra insole. But to me, it's like buying a boot or an item that's too big is almost worse than buying an item that's too small. You'll have a little bit of give and like stretch with some items, but I think once you wear and like break in an item that is like too big, it just becomes even more roomier. And the Virgil was one of those items that I bought because of that discount price. And I guess the lesson that I learned here is to, one is obviously try things on when you can. And two would be like, avoid getting it if you're not gonna, get it in your proper size. Because eventually you just don't end up wearing the item and it just becomes like a waste of money. So the money that like I had saved in getting the discount or whatever, I honestly like the cost per wear on that boot were very, very low because I just didn't feel comfortable wearing them. And so in the long run, I ended up spending more money than I probably should have. Thankfully, I was able to sell that boot pretty much for what I paid for, because I hardly wore them. And so I listed them and I got them sold. And, I put that money towards other items that, were going to fit me better and that I was definitely going to get more use out of. The second item that I regret buying is also a footwear item. It is also because of a sizing issue, and that is the roll-in jogger. So I don't really own a lot of sneakers from Visvim, and I think that's with certain intention. I don't necessarily think the value's there in the same way that the boots like kind of offer some value, and there's plenty of people that already argue that they're terrible value, but that's a whole separate conversation. But I think with the boots, it's like you're getting a well-made boot with some excellent materials and certain like styling factors that you could only get from Visvim. With the roll-in jogger, I wanted a slightly different take on, a classic runner. Like, I can go out and buy a New Balance, I understand that, but I really wanted a product and a sneaker that kind of fit in with like the design ethos and aesthetic. I had read several articles online that you should definitely size up when it comes to the roll-in jogger, and much to my detriment, I completely ignored everyone. And this is kind of a similar situation as the Virgil boot. The roll-in jogger was on sale, so I didn't pick it up for the full retail price, but I bought it at feature for, I want to say like 50% off plus like an additional discount or something like that. And when they arrived, they looked small in the box. When I put them on, they were definitely small. and I kept trying to force myself to wear them, and it got to the point where it was painful. Originally I had bought them to wear them as like walking shoes for my trip to Japan, but I honestly couldn't even walk for like 30 minutes without it being like an issue. So I ended up trading those with my brother. Thankfully, he has a slightly smaller foot than I, and we were relatively similar sizes anyway. So, I mean, worst case scenario, I could just borrow them from him, so it's not a complete loss. That's one of those items where it's like, I knew better, right? Like, I had read so many different articles and so many different Reddit threads online about the sizing for the Roland jogger. And I'm kind of like, you know what? It can't be that bad. Like, I can just kind of unlace them a little bit, but you should definitely size up. And I think that pretty soon I'm probably just going to make a whole sizing video that people can reference, because I think there isn't enough information out there for some Visvim products, but specifically with the Roland jogger, there was enough like sizing information out there for me to have made an educated decision. So I guess the lesson here is try things on if you can, listen to some of the stuff online. Obviously everyone's like foot shape and sizing's a little bit different, and not everything is going to be universal, but I think it was widely known enough that the Roland jogger ran relatively small for me to at least like take that into consideration. The next item, and this is kind of like an all-encompassing topic, but I have a few different pieces that fall into this category, including the two that were just mentioned, and that's buying items that are on sale just because they're on sale. I think we're all always looking for a discount, and with Visvim, obviously, if we can get hundreds and in some cases even thousands of dollars off, it's definitely worth biting the bullet sometimes. But I think that if an item is being purchased only because it's on sale and not necessarily because it fits into the rest of your wardrobe, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice in that context. And very early on for me, when I started buying Visvim, I think a lot of what I did was in that realm. Just because an item was on sale and it was in my size, I would typically pick it up because it's like, you know what, I'm buying this brand and I'm like really getting into it. So I'm trying to like cop every single piece that I can. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that you shouldn't buy something just because it's on sale. Like, you should genuinely like want the product, take the time to think about how it's going to fit into your wardrobe, make sure that it's not necessarily something that you're like kind of over consuming. Like, for example, I think the issue that I've had with a few shirts is that I'll buy a certain style and a style that's like relatively adjacent to it, and it kind of just becomes like the same shirt twice. And there's a few different models that I own. Like, for example, I own several like Pioneer shirts and like lumber shirts, and I think that the patterns are different enough to where it kind of makes sense to buy both. But there's been situations where I'm like, I have a denim shirt, a dark blue denim shirt, and I just bought another dark blue denim shirt. And like, yeah, I know that the pockets are different, but the fit's relatively the same, the style's relatively the same, and I can kind of use both in the same context because the weight of the fabric is the same. So it kind of became like redundant purchases that I would make just because certain items would be on sale. And I think it's advice that I used to take for myself before I started buying Visvim with other brands, but I think I got so like focused and like honed in on like trying to like create this like crazy collection that I kind of just got carried away. And it's definitely something that I'm trying to adjust to, and thankfully I don't really do impulse buys anymore, so that's a plus. The fourth item that I regret buying, and this is something relatively small, like it wasn't the most expensive item, but it's definitely like a topic that I want to like touch on. I bought a pair of like the Malice Shaman folk shoes, like the low top ones that I've shown previously on this channel. And again, you guys are going to notice like a consistent theme and topic here, but with those, I think I bought them because of the hype surrounding Visvim. At the time, the Visvim FBT was kind of like ingrained in like hype beast culture, and the moccasin styles that were being offered from Visvim were just extremely popular, and everyone kind of wanted them at that time, or at least the people that were like into that kind of stuff. They wanted to step away from like the Nikes, the Jordans, and kind of start getting into like elevated footwear items. And I think the Shaman folk, at this point I already had an FBT, so there wasn't necessarily a point or rationale for me to like get another moccasin model. But I think that I was so driven by the hype behind that style that even though I picked up the Malice Shaman folk for a good price, I still bought it, not for myself, but for others. And that's the lesson that I learned in that scenario. Like, you shouldn't just buy an item because other people like it. Like, you should definitely like try to buy things that you're gonna get wear out of and that you find to be, fitting to your look and your aesthetic. Because it's one of those shoes that, like, again, similar point to like, some of the items that I already talked about previously. But I bought it and I didn't wear it nearly as much as I should have. And even though I got it for a good price, the cost per wears just don't make sense. And I tend to like stay away from like wearing it now. I mean, I've probably worn it like 2 times in the last like 5 years. And I think that just shows you that you shouldn't buy items to impress others or because someone else likes them before you do anything. It should be something that fits in with your style and something that you're going to want to wear, because otherwise it's just, again, a waste of money. The fifth item that I regret buying, and it's more of a category. All right, so here's the interesting thing. I don't regret every single item that I've purchased in this category, but it's one of those things that, like, there's certain jackets I'm willing to put up with it for, and then there's other items that I can't, like, it kind of makes me not want to wear them. And that's not taking into consideration the like laundry, the care, like instructions of particular items. And for those of you that are aware, specifically, it's going to be like mud dyed items. So I have several different mud dyed nylon jackets from the brand at this point, which again touches base on creating some redundancy. I mean, thankfully, I have different styles. Like, I have the Thorson, the Coach jacket, and things like that. But the issue with not taking into consideration what the garment is either composed of from a fabric perspective or the finishing that's been done to it, like in this case, mud dyeing, you really get to know what it's like to live with an item when an everyday situation like washing your hands becomes a problem. Because if you get like the overspray from the water onto your mud dyed jacket, it creates these like water stains, and it just, I know that we buy the products with the intention to wear them and to have them develop character, but there's a difference between character development and just straight up like, usability. And with mud dyed nylon products, whenever you get like a simple water stain, you end up with these like white like stains throughout the garment, and it's just, you have to take into consideration, like, if you take it to a cleaner, it's like, are they going to ruin the jacket? And it's like a bunch of little things like that end up making it a hassle and a pain to wear everyday items. Like, I'm a really big fan of my Gavin jacket, and I will for sure put up with some of the instructions when it comes to washing in order to be able to own that piece, because I really enjoy it. But there was a day where I wanted to wear it, the temperature allowed for it to be worn, but there was like a 50% chance that it would rain. And I know that if I were to wear that jacket and it would happen to rain, then there'd be stains all over because the mud dye finish would get washed off, and there's so many different like things that I like could have considered when it came to that wear. And I think that it really does affect the wear experience if you're not completely like, obsessed with like a certain item. Like, again, like I mentioned, that Gavin jacket to me is one of those pieces that I'm always going to keep. But for some of the items that I'm not as big of a fan of, it just becomes a pain to like wear them. And if I have to take into consideration like the weather elements and things like that, it's hard to label those as everyday pieces. Like, for example, right now I'm sitting under a tree, and as you guys can see, there's like fucking leaves falling. And this shirt, while it is silk and like a cotton blend, I could just throw it in the washer and it's really no big deal. But like, to not be able to wear a jacket because it's raining, because you're afraid to get water on it, or taking like the jacket off so you can wash your hands so you don't get some of that overspray, it really makes everyday life kind of complicated. And I think that when you're buying these items, you should be able to blend it into your everyday life and have them, I guess the shortest way to put it is, the things that we buy we shouldn't adjust our lifestyle and our habits to wear things, right? The things that we wear should be easily like blended into our lifestyle and our habits. And it's one of those things and like pieces of like consideration that I think now that I've kind of purchased enough product and developed enough of a look that I want, to where it's something I'm going to consider more often than I did in the past. Of course, this isn't like a Visvim slander video. It's kind of really meant to serve as like an honest take. And I would really enjoy if you guys would share in the comments if you have experience with certain items that you regret buying from Visvim, or if there's pieces that you really enjoyed and can't see yourself getting rid of. Until next time, thank you all again for tuning in. Peace.